Okay, good evening and welcome to the Prophetic Outlook. I don't have my normal camera set up and all. We had a debacle with a whole load of technical issues. So this camera, which is my normal camera, is not in action at the moment. So without further ado, we'll say hello to everybody. We've got Kelly here, Yvonne Kennedy's here, Coco Bear, we've got Deborah, Full of Hope, Renee's here. Renee, thank you for that super sticker. Derek is here, Emmaus Road Productions, Sunday Lily, Allison is here, C Blessed is here, Sir Pierce DeVille, Coco Bear, JICA, Sherry's here, Caterlin's here, um, Stephanie's here. Jared's here. Guys, as you're coming on, please do me the favor. Say hi, say where you're coming in from. Let us know where you're tuning in from. And aren't these exciting times to be alive? Let me know you can hear me, see me okay. I'm not sure if my lighting is right because I don't have my right camera. But let me know you can hear me, see me, and all of that business okay. And then I'm coming through okay because I'm working just off a webcam today. Lots happening in the news, lots going on right now. There obviously the key thing that we're talking about is what's happening between Israel and Iran, and I personally believe is a prophetic fulfillment of Jeremiah 49 verses 34 to about 39. Well, probably about 38 actually, and I believe that this prophetic fulfillment, like we had said this time last week, before it all kicked off, and it feels like it's been longer now. I believe that it's the flick of the finger for end time battles, end time wars, and it certainly seems to be partnering to some degree with what I believe is um, the continued execution of Psalm 83. And it's all starting to come together now. And this means, in my opinion, that we're in a quickening time, a time of acceleration when it comes to prophecy, and a time in which we are coming to the setting of an NWO or a reset in terms of the system that we're in terms of the timing that we're in. We're coming into that acceleration point, but we're actually seeing so much come to fruition. So let's look at a few things. And you have to bear with me because we've had technical issues. My slides are an absolute mess. So I'm trying to find where everything is. So I'll share this with you. IDF spokesman in the statement says this is right now. 60 planes are now attacking Iran in the area from which most of the missiles were launched at Israel, including underground compounds. So that means that there may be a degree in how they're upping the capability of reaching those compounds. We don't know if bunker busters are being used in this sense, but there's certainly you're seeing Iran taking a pounding. Let me see if this slide will. Let me see if I can get it up. Hold on. There we go. Israel says Iran's missile stockpile, in relation to what we just said, as went from this current operation, it's estimated at 40% decrease from what it was, right? So it's 40% down. Now, all of that being said, we know that there's a bigger acceleration in the play right now. Um, at this moment, 17 American military tanker aircraft, this is about 2 hours ago, are now flying to the Middle East. Now, this is in combination with both President Trump's statements yesterday and the sort of convoy of military now going out into that direction. And obviously, this is basically to bolster the American interests in the Middle East in terms of their assets, in terms of safety around individuals, but actually in terms of something else, which we're going to talk about today. Um, and that's basically the Strait of Hormuz. And we're going to talk about what this means and what would be the possibility of the outcome of an attack upon the Strait of Hormuz, but also how this plays into the reset, how this plays into a reset. So we're seeing so much happen. And I don't know about you, but I just think that not only are these exciting times to be alive, and that's not taken away from the horror and the the horrifying aspects of war, but we're seeing not just the fulfillment of Jeremiah 49, but actually in God's perfect timing, the reshifting of a geopolitical scene. And what I mean by that is if you take the state of Iran, specifically the leaders of Iran in terms of the Ayatollah, in terms of the IRGC, and their influence around the world, their influence on what their biggest export around the world, despite some thinking it's oil, it's not, it's terror. And that terror has been going far and wide for years. And I said this that, even over here in Ireland, you had the new IRA trained by Hezbollah. Hezbollah were a proxy of Iran. They were funded by Iran to spread terror. And that is the main export of Iran in this term. Now, that obviously, when we talk about this, we're talking about the separation of the IRGC from the Iranian people. And like we said this last week, the Iranian people were out and writing graffiti welcoming the strikes because they want out from, certainly the majority want out from under the regime that's there. And in that, I think that one, this became a political necessity to step into this conflict, not just for Israel, but actually even in terms of the powers that are getting involved with, including America, including the UK, with protecting Israel from Iranian strikes. It's become this, I guess, thing that cannot be ignored any longer. Now, I'd seen somebody actually comment under my a Facebook post I put up, um, and they basically said that President Trump is a doommonger. He is leading people in the world to war. President Biden was trying to help Iran. And it just struck me to the ignorance that people have over the situation because President Biden funded Iran, as did the Obama administration. They allowed for the continuation of the pursuit to nuclearization. And the ignorant in the world, and you'll be surprised how many's there, the ignorant in the world are looking at that and say, well, they're an independent country. Why can't they have a nuclear weapon? Because they want the eradication of others. The only thing that works in terms of nuclear weapons is they act as a mutually destructive deterrent between nations. But if you have a nation that is basically uh, they're a Shiite death cult, and what they're wanting is to wipe both Israel and America off the map. And you saw, was it last year, Iran came out and basically said that they were involved in, or there was intelligence reports that came out says that Iran were involved in assassination attempts on the American president. Now, let's be clear. Donald Trump has not said that he is getting directly involved in this, but there has been rhetoric that has come out recently. And let me just try and find this. And this is kind of a change in tone for me. It says we now have complete, so we now have complete and total control over the skies of over Iran. Iran had good trackers and other defensive equipment and plenty of it, but it doesn't compare to American made, conceived, and manufactured stuff. Nobody does it better than the good old USA. So, not only do we know that obviously there's a weapon supply and there's an ability that, that Israel are doing this as the forerunners, but they're not doing this alone. But now there seems to be this garnering amongst the White House that President Trump is making his opinions and feelings clear, that he is involved in this and they are protecting their interests. And we want to get to what the real interests have to be in this. Um, JD Vance said Iran could have had a civilian nuclear program without enrichment on its territory, but it refused. So it shows the red line was met. President Trump may decide he must take further steps to end Iranian enrichment. Now, the reason that I put that up is because if you go back to the start of this on Friday, Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, said that this would be a 2 week operation. Now, I believe that that 2 week operation is there for a reason, as in they've said, look, this is 2 weeks and that's it. And I believe that's the window that they've been given. And to help get the job done and to help garner American interest and certainly the world's interest, what you've seen is American military now move into that region. And there's a reason behind that. One of the main reasons is an escalated war or a prolonged conflict will undoubtedly have economic repercussions. Now, already we've had Shell, um, Esso, BP all come out, all the big oil companies, and say the conflict needs to come to an end soon because they're reaching the point in which they believe there's going to be dire consequences on the world's energy supplies or oil supplies. Now, when we talk about oil, you have to understand it doesn't just, and I'm sure you do, it doesn't just uh, refer to how we fuel our car or how we heat our homes, but oil is basically used in the manufacturing of so much, whether it's farming, whether it's food manufacturing. All of that oil is used in the process. So this is what brings us to the Strait of Hormuz, which is the maritime entryway to the Gulf, and it controls about 20 to 25% of the world's um, shipment of oil. So about 20 to 25% of the world's oil, about 17 million to 21 million barrels of oil a day go through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, the Strait of Hormuz is already and has been in the past used to try and hold back aggression from states, from other national interests, to make sure that Iran can get away with blue murder, really, just to keep going with what they want to do. And you had this is yesterday, the head of the Iranian parliament say that they were going to close the Strait of Hormuz. Now, if they close the Strait of Hormuz, then that would have dire effects. And one of the things that you would see off that is that um, predictions would say that if it was closed for anywhere between 2 to 4 weeks. Now, remember, the window that Netanyahu and Israel have been given is 2 weeks. But if it goes between 2 to 4 weeks, you would see roughly about 10% of the oils or the world's oil supply uh, be delayed or stopped from reaching its destination. Um, you would see an increase, a massive increase in prices. At the minute, I think a barrel of oil is about $85. It would probably go up to about the 150 mark if it goes past the 4 week area. So if this conflict goes on for a longer space of time, then it's going to have this dire effect on the economy. So that would mean that if it goes to up to $150 a barrel, and even if it goes past this, I think the consensus is between 1 to 3 months if this conflict lasts that long. Now, I don't believe it will. You've already seen a 40% depletion on their missiles and their missile capability. You've seen the eradication and elimination of most of their top men, and that has continued. So if someone gets killed, someone else gets pushed into the job, and then boom, Israel takes them out. And it's going to be the case now that they're going to be grabbing the milkman and the window cleaner, and they're going to be pushing them into the top general jobs, and then they'll be taken out. And that's been the continuation. So I don't believe it'll last that long. But if it goes to 2 to 4 weeks, what you're going to see is a massive increase in the price of oil. And you will see a massive increase come down to the consumer. But also, like I said, if it goes between 1 to 3 months, that increase becomes severe and it takes the world into a global depression. Or global recession, sorry. If it goes past the 3 months mark, we'll be expecting a global depression. So, what we're talking about here is major economic issues coming out of Iran and coming out of the conflict, regardless. Now, why is that? I'm not saying that to be a harbinger of doom. I'm saying that because that has consequences too. So if you start to see that, like BP and all of the other oil companies are saying, um, we're already at a critical point with oil refineries damaged, on fire, with the Strait of Hormuz already experiencing issues. So let me see, was it today? Today there was a crash between two ships on the Strait of Hormuz, right? Two, I think they were carrying oil. Two oil ships crashed, and as far as I know, there's been no major environmental impact. But the reason they seem to have crashed, according to the JMIC, is that they're receiving interference from Iran's port of Bandar Abbas, right? So from the Iranian port of Bandar Abbas, there seems to be some sort of interference that is causing problems with the communication of these ships and causing problems with the navigation of these ships. So already it looks like, now it's not definite, but it looks like there's been Iranian players trying to cause havoc at that port, at that strait. Why? Because if they know that if they interrupt the world's oil supply, countries around the world could turn around and put pressure onto Israel to stop. Now, I personally believe that the American administration and Donald Trump, they know this. That's why they were given the 2 week window. Because the 2 week window, the 2 week interruption, basically causes a bump in world oil prices, but doesn't cause continual devastation. If you go to the 4 weeks, you're starting to see that. If you go to between 2 to 4, it's passed on to the consumer. Between 1 to 3 months, you're talking about severe issues. $200 a barrel of oil. It'd be what, $10 a gallon. All of that going up, right? If you go past the 3 month mark into an elongated, pulled out war, which Iran will hope to do. That's why Iran's trying to bring in different players in Iraq and different Shiite militias to try and get involved. Now, already the world, as in like Russia's wiped their hands. Now, yes, they're still Iran, they're still allies with Iran, and they're still offering a place to the leadership, including Al Khamenei, but they've wiped their hands in terms of actually getting involved. China has openly said we're not getting involved, but there's still, that's their open public statement. But what Iran's trying to do is to stretch this out. What Israel wants to do is, in this 2 weeks, finish the job. And I personally believe that's why America is coming. That's why you're starting to see them come to the area. That's why you see rhetoric from the likes of J.D. Vance saying that Trump may decide he might take further steps to end Iranian enrichment. Now, what that would mean and what that would look like is probably attacking the likes of the Bashir nuclear plant. Now, the Bashir nuclear plant is right bang in Elam. Okay, so if you're unaware, and I'm sure you're not, Elam is in western Iran, or southwestern Iran. So it's right here on the Persian Gulf. And you've got the Bashir nuclear plant. Now, already we've seen nuclear plants and already we've seen strikes in that area for lesser nuclear plants. But the IAEA says that these nuclear plants and the nuclear sites have not been destroyed. They have been, to some degree, damaged. If what you're seeing is the movement of the Americans along here, the continued support to get this operation done and done quickly, because they cannot afford for Iran to be nuclearized, nor can they afford for Iran to become a vacuum in which someone like China or Russia can really cement power there. But what they want to do is to eradicate these nuclear capabilities ASAP, so that we're not seeing the Strait of Hormuz closed. Because if we see the Strait of Hormuz closed, every country in the world is going to be putting pressure on Israel and as a byproduct on America. Now, I personally believe what we're going to see is a continued intensification. And I believe that that's why the Americans are coming to the area. Now, they're coming saying that they're protecting. That's what President Trump says, that they're protecting their assets and their interests. And that's true because there's been attacks on US bases, certainly in Iraq. But as they're coming and the support and the strength that they're bringing, if they're bringing extra weapons, if they're bringing bunker buster bombs, if you're seeing that, then I believe that we're getting ready for the Phoenician show. And this seems to be the case when it comes to the rhetoric that we're seeing around from Donald Trump himself, that he is saying that, that that we now have complete control of the skies, that it's all from the USA that have supplied these weapons. I think he's ready to cement, or going to get ready to cement, the last blow. And that would mean the big sites like Bashir, like I've lost my graphics. Where did they all go? Yeah, like the Bashir power plant. Now, if the Bashir power plant goes, the likelihood is, now you've got the Zagos Mountains there that sort of block radiation fallout to some degree, but it's still said that there will be, if Bashir, for instance, if there's a leak, if there's a nuclear leak, radioactive leak from an attack, you would see certain areas being affected. You would see the likes. Um, you would see the likes of Iran or and UAE all being affected by this. So I believe that you're probably also getting America coming into the scene here to make sure that when the attack happens in here, because they have to take this plant out, when the attack happens here, that it is done right, that it is done with the right precision, that it collapses in on itself, and that they're ready to make sure that there's no nuclear fallout here. Now, if there is, then that would be, I think, another thing behind the completion of Jeremiah 49, in the sense that they flee to the four corners of the world. Now, that being said, that is happening already. You've seen commercial flights go off that we believe that, and everybody believes that it's IRGC leadership on those flights, and your Khamenei's already in hiding, and Trump has said that, look, we know exactly the bunker that he's hiding in. We're just not interested in taking him out right now. But there's all of this is happening, right? All of this is happening. And I think it's interesting to know that when you read Jeremiah 49, let me read it for you quickly here. When you read Jeremiah 49, where are we? The intent behind this seems to be something that we see continually when it comes to the area of Persia. So Persia, or what we would say now as Iran, includes the area of Elam. Now, in most prophecies, Elam is counted as separate. It is still part of the Persian Empire, but it is usually referred to in a separate prophecy, like it is in Jeremiah 49. And it's worth noting that Elam itself is not referred to in Ezekiel 38, hence why I believe Elam comes before Ezekiel 38. Because Ezekiel 38 includes Persia, but it's Persia in terms of Iran, and it excludes Elam. And where in all the other prophecies, when Elam is mentioned, it is mentioned separate from Persia, even though it falls under the same territory. I hope that makes sense. So let me read this from verse 35. Thus says the Lord of hosts, behold, I will break Shabar, right? The bow of Elam. Now, we've talked about this before. The bow of Elam is the cassette. It is literally the motion of the bow. It is the motion of the bow firing. So it's talking about taking out the capability of Elam firing anything, right? And that's being done right now, because when we're talking about Elam, you have to understand that in modern day concept, the rulers that are in charge of Elam are the IRGC. right? Even though in ancient speak, it would be the Persian Empire, it would be Elam. Elam itself, its leadership is still the IRGC. Its uh, ruling is still under the IRGC. So, behold, I will break the bow of Elam, the foremost of their might. Against Elam I will bring the four winds. Talking about the Ruach, the winds, the north, south, east, west, right? From the four quarters of heaven, and scatter them toward all those winds. In other words, what you're seeing is what you're seeing now when President Trump issues a warning, get out of Tehran. And you saw the traffic jams. They started leaving Tehran. Um, there shall be no nations where the outcasts of Elam will not go, for I will cause Elam to be dismayed. And I think we're seeing that right now before their enemies and before those who seek their life. I will bring disaster upon them. Now, that word disaster, I personally think could hint to some sort of leak coming off, probably likely, the Bashir power plant, right? It might not be. It's conjecture, but I'm just saying that if there is something like that, that would, in my opinion, fall under the terms of that warning from God. There's seven I wills from God in this chapter. I will um, bring disaster upon them. My fierce anger, says the Lord, and I will send the sword after them. So some have said that uh, what differentiates Jeremiah 49 from Ezekiel 38? Well, Ezekiel 38, it is God intervening. Jeremiah 49, a little bit like Psalm 83's fulfillment in terms of the Zechariah 12. It is the soldiers, it is the equipping, it is conflict, it is war. Okay? Until I have consumed them. And then this is the bit I want to get to. Verse 38. I will set my throne in Elam and will destroy from there the king and the princes, says the Lord. Now, why is that important? Because we know that the Bible's very clear. You go to Daniel 10, verse 13. Uh, the angel from God, right? Could be Gabriel because Michael steps in and helps him, but he says he had a delay. What was the delay? It was the prince of Persia. Now, it's not a literal physical prince. It is a principality, same as what is referred to by Paul in Ephesians 6, verse 12. It is the spirit that is behind the rulership of the territory, and it was resisting so much so that the archangel Michael had to get involved. Now, that resisting, that whole thing that came on there is because the principality wanted that territory. And this goes back to the cosmic geography that we see throughout the Old Testament. We see in Deuteronomy 32, verse 8, that the borders of men are set by the B'nai Ha-Elohim. In other words, the B'nai Ha-Elohim are put over the borders of men, the sons of God. Not sons like Jesus is a son, but the sons of God is in their spiritual hierarchy, what we would refer to as angels. And they're set over the territory. And Persia, Iran, Elam, there's a territory there. And it's the territory that the principality behind there is being replaced, I believe, right now. Look at it this way, right? The fastest growing evangelical church in the world is Iran, a Muslim state run by a minority Shiite government, is now being transformed from the roots, from the ground up, through visions and dreams and encounters with God on a real level, that people are stepping away from their Islamic roots in which they could face not just persecution, but murder. They could be killed for their faith. They're stepping away from it and embracing Christ. And what is happening is then you're seeing the leadership removed, the IRGC removed. You're seeing Al Khamenei hiding in a bunker, possibly an open door for him to go to Russia. But you're seeing the rest of the leadership all start to vacate. There's so much so that there's no leadership to really give an instruction of how the attacks should continue. And what is being set up, I believe, is a spiritual throne for the kingdom of heaven. because this is talking to the principalities. Now, some will say, well, this is a physical throne. I don't particularly think it is, because I think you take the context of what he's saying here. So if you look at verse 38, I will set my throne in Elam and will destroy from there the kings and the princes. When we're talking about the kings and the princes, it is talking about the principalities, the same as what we see in Daniel 10. And as he's talking about destroying the principalities, the principalities, we don't see them with our physical eyes, but we know, according to Ephesians 6 and Psalm 82 and a plethora of other scriptures, that they're there. Some will refer to them as territorial spirits, and they're ruling. And what he's saying is, no, 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 boom, I'm going to have them dealt with. They're going to go, their proxies, aka the IRGC leadership, are going to go. The Iranian revival is well underway, and now what's going to happen is King Jesus is going to establish his spiritual throne, or one of his spiritual thrones, over the nation. So I just think that's amazing. I think that's amazing that we're getting to see these things at play. I think that we're getting to see all of this come into being, all of this happening. And I think that, right, can I just, I'm going to do, this is a disclaimer, a public announcement service thing to my wife. If you're watching in the other room, it is a hot day. I'm in an office with no windows that I can open, and you've got the heating on. Could you please turn the heating off? I am boiling. So that I just had to say that. But look, I want to go into some stuff, if you don't mind, because I believe that we're in a switching point, a turning point of things. And please pray that my wife has heard that message and turns the heating off, because if I pass out in here, I don't know what to do. So if we talk about Elam, right? The Bible, if we take the hermeneutical approach to the Bible, there is a law called the rule of first mention. And where the rule of first mention takes us in terms of Elam, it's not, she's just texted me saying it's a holy sauna. It's not a holy sauna. You're killing me. I can feel myself sweating here. Turn the heating off, please. Right? Oh, right. Anyway, the rule of first mention when it comes to Elam takes us back to also the first war in the Bible, Genesis chapter 14. So we had Genesis chapter 11. So this comes into play when it comes to the worldview. Genesis chapter 11, we have the Babylonian position, right? We have the Tower of Babel under Nimrod, Semiramis, and their child Tammuz. And Nimrod has this plan, and I believe kind of seduced by principalities, and he has this plan to open up a portal, so to speak, to the other world, to heaven, right? How do I know this? Because Babylon is called Babylon, the original language, which means gate of gods, right? And that's what he was hoping to do. Then what we see is Abraham is pulled out. So Abraham is pulled out, Genesis chapter 12. He is set apart, and he is set apart to bring a people, the Yahudi, the Jews, right? And he is set apart unto God. By the time we get to Genesis 14, Abraham is already walking with God. And in Genesis 14, these kings show up. So you have Tidal, whose name means king of nations, but really means king of tribes, right? You have Arioch, whose name means lion-like. In other words, not a lion, but like a lion, right? So these are the bad kings, the four, right? You have Amraphel. Now, Amraphel, many theologians believe, was Nimrod under a different name. So it was Nimrod after the dispersal of languages, after God's intervention in Genesis 11. And what you see from there is he joins this, and his name Amraphel can be seen as a title of Nimrod, because his name means darkens the counsel, or brings dark counsel. Then you have the king of Elam, who seems to be heading it all out, Kedar Laomer. And he is the king of Elam. And this is the first sort of mention of an Elam as an area, okay, as a place. So they go out and they start continuation of like subjugation and rule and all of this. Now, Kedar Laomer and the people of Elam were associated with the bow, right? So they were associated with the bow. In fact, they were all known for the nation of Elam was attributed skills of the archers. So they were known for being archers. And what happens is 12 years goes it by, and they've subjugated these five other territories, the territory of Sodom, Gomorrah, and all of that, right? They've subjugated that. Then in the 13th year, there's a breakout of rebellion. Now, why is that important? Well, don't forget that it was Friday the 13th, the early hours of Friday the 13th, that this all started, right? Now, I'm not going to go down too crazy with this, but I want you to see a pattern. 13 can point to a change of order. It can point to a change of order from one order to another order. And I believe that we're at a pivotal point with Jeremiah 49. And this is what I've always believed. Jeremiah 49 is this prophecy that can shift and accelerate into the New World Order. Not that I'm hoping for that, but it's a prophecy that is actually doing the will of God, of setting Iran up as a God, as a nation of people who love God and chase after Jesus. But that's going to be a catalyst to bring about the next point, right? To bring about the next movement. You think of it this way, right? What happens if this becomes past the 4 week mark, right? If we're in the month 1 to month 3 and we see $200 a barrel of oil and oil prices go sky high and on par of 1973, what happens if it goes past that and the world becomes severely economically strained to the point of a global depression? Well, then there has to be a remedy, and the only remedy that is already prepared is central bank digital currencies. So what I'm saying is that I believe that, not that it's God's sort of desire for that, but as we know that every event, every catastrophe is an opportunity to those who desire to be. So if you're seeing a financial crisis in that way, if you're seeing the strains of war, and we've already know that the world is in a debt spiral, certainly all of these countries around the world, they're in a debt spiral, and then they have an issue like what's happening in Iran right now. And if it goes past the 2 week mark and becomes prolonged, you're going to start to see major repercussions on food prices, um, energy prices, petrol, all of that. You're going to start to see all of that. And then if it continues on, then you're going to start to see markets crash. And then the contingency plan must be brought into play. Even though they're saying that the CBDC systems are maybe a year away for some, they're maybe 6 months for another, they're maybe 5 years away for another. No, I think that if you have something like this that has a global repercussion, it may be capitalized upon, maybe capitalized upon to bring in the New World Order quickly. So we're looking at Cardalorma now, and like I says, they're all archers. That's what the nation, and I know I'm going scatty because you know me, I just don't really look at my notes, right? So they're known as archers because they're known, and this is where the Elam prophecy comes in. But when you look at this, 13 is significant. On the 13th year, there was a change of order. You see this all the way through the Bible. The promise of Isaac, right? There was 13 years from the point in which God promised Isaac to the point in which Isaac was born. Joseph went from the point of slavery to the point of being in Pharaoh's house and second in command of Egypt, but it took 13 years. And when you look at this, there's so much that happens around the number 13. And remember, it was the 13th of June, right? 13th of June. 13 also stands for rebellion and how God deals with rebellion, because Nimrod was the 13th generation from Ham, the 13th generation in the curse. Remember, Ham was cursed. And he was the 13th generation, and Nimrod was the hunter who went before God and was known as the rebel. So 13 represents rebellion, but 13 also represents how God comes against rebellion and flips and changes the order. And I said on Sunday that it just so happened that it was June 13th, 613, right? 613. So Nimrod represents the rebellion, 13, rebellion against God's law, 613. There's 613 laws in God's law. Anyway, you might think I'm off the reservation in this, but I think that there's something to be said about this. I think that God does nothing by mistake, and instead, what we get is God stamping his authority on a prophecy being fulfilled. So, we saw the 13th of June 2025, the start of Operation Rising Lions, but obviously they work off a Hebrew calendar, right? So it wasn't, let me see if this, I'm gonna, maybe it's just taking a while for my radiator to cool down, but Kelly, please make sure it's off. I'm boiling in here. So they work off a Hebrew calendar, not a Gregorian calendar. So the 13th of June was the 17th of Sivan. Now that's a noted date. The 17th of Sivan. The 17th Sivan is mentioned for the first time in the Bible in the book of Esther. Esther happens to be a time in which um, the Israelites were being persecuted under Haman, right? You know that it's that book, but God flips the order. So Haman is persecuting all the Jews, wants to wipe them out, and then God flips the order, and Haman gets hung, right? When we look at this as well, the Sivan is noted as a month as the month in which the law was given. It's the month. It's Shavat. It's the month in which the law of God, the Torah, was given. It's also the month in which we associate with Pentecost, Shavat, right, in which the Spirit was given. It also happens to be the 17th of Sivan happens to be recognized in the Jewish culture as the day in which Noah's Ark came to rest on Mount Arad. What was that? Well, that was a new world order. That was something else starting. And I just find it interesting that on that date, what we would see as Friday the 13th, 17th of Nisan, or 17th of Sivan, they decide to start Operation Rising Lions. Um, yeah, I could use the cowboy hat. Actually, that's not a bad idea. I'm boiling. I think I'm sweat. I am. I'm sweating in here. So, like, if you look at this, right, the you can start to see that there's a connection that God doesn't want us to not miss. God doesn't want us to miss it. He wants us to see that His hand is stamped upon this. That when you're seeing these things in action, you're seeing these things come to play. God doesn't use anything or let anything go by mistake. You know, it struck me that God was behind this. If you remember, just before, I think it was the Thursday before the attack. So the attack was a Friday. Um, Benjamin Netanyahu went up to the wall, right, the Western Wall, and he was praying. And I believe that the attack happening on that day is significant in terms of what this all means. Jeremiah 49 is a prophecy that I see as the flick of the finger to end time escalation and end time wars, because it takes the Psalm 83 conflict, and what it'll do is bring in the globe, but it brings in the rest of the world. Um, yeah, I can open a door, but then the sound will all come through. So, oh, that's nice. The sound will all come through. um, so, like I said, what you're starting to see here is not just the setup in numbers, but the setup for everything. I believe Jeremiah 49 lays the grounds for Ezekiel 38. I don't think Ezekiel 38 is going to happen just yet. I don't, right? So please don't think that that's what's coming next, or that's what's coming, quickly. I believe we're going to see the continuation of the fulfillment of Psalm 83 in terms of it was a seven front war. I think other nations, certainly in terms of the surrounding territories, are going to start to get involved or start to get provoked against Israel, but Israel's going to flatten those areas. And I mean that metaphorically. I'm not talking about and taking lightly the effects of war. I'm just talking about the fulfillment that we see ready for Ezekiel 38, verse 11, in which they live in unwalled villages. That means Zechariah 12, verse 2 needs to be fulfilled. And so let me just point out a few things. And I know I'm going all over the place, but bear with me. And in Ezekiel 38, or sorry, in Jeremiah 49, some people believe that that represents a time of the millennial kingdom because of the throne, right? Because God says that he's going to establish his throne in Elam. I think that that terms of throne is the replacement of the principalities, but even if it is a literal throne, there is no reason to put that in the millennial kingdom. If that's in the millennial kingdom, you have to explain Elam's absence in the other end time wars, right? What you will see, what the reason I don't believe it's the millennial kingdom is because that's a continual progressive prophecy, and you see that in the model of Old Testament prophets. Look at Zechariah 12, for instance, right? In Zechariah 12, verse 2, behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of drunkenness to all the surrounding peoples. So it's specific to the surrounding peoples. But if you go further, if you go past that, right, and you go to Zechariah um, 14, it says, behold, the day of the Lord is coming, and your spoil will be divided in your midst, for I will gather all the nations to battle against Jerusalem. Now, that all the nations, well, that to me is Megiddo, right? That's Armageddon. That's at that point. However, the surrounding nations is a previous prophecy, so it's a progressive prophecy. Even if you take Zechariah 12 in its sense, it talks about a war, right? Now, I believe Zechariah 12 is the fulfillment. Am I losing everybody here, by the way? I believe Zechariah 12 is the fulfillment of the prayer of Asaph. So Asaph prays, this is Psalm 83, talks about the 10 nation confederacy that comes against Israel. And Zechariah 12, I believe, is the answer, God's answer to that prayer. So, what you see in Zechariah 12 is the continuation up to about verse 8. In that day, the Lord will defend the inhabitants of Jerusalem. The one who is feeble among them in that day shall be like David, and the house of David shall be like God. In other words, the people will be involved, right? So this isn't like Ezekiel 38 where God steps in and puts his hand right in and takes care of it all. He is equipping the people, just like you see right now with the IDF and the IAF. But then when you go to verse 10, so one verse later, you're in the millennial kingdom. That's the progression of the prophecy. You're not in the millennial kingdom in verse 8 or 9, but you're in the millennial kingdom in verse 10. And that's the progression of sometimes how prophecies work. You see this in Isaiah all the time. First coming, talk full description of the first coming, and then the next verse it's the second coming, not including any gap of time in between, but there is obviously a gap of time. So all I want to say is that you're living in this time where it's it's not to again negate the hardship and the horror of war. It's to go, hold on a minute. I'm living in a time in which God is overturning principalities. And so if God is overturning principalities to establish freedom for those in Iran who are now worshiping Christ, loving Christ, and on fire for Jesus, and now they're going to be, by the looks of this, freed from the IRGC, who I believe are the proxy of the principalities that are above them, the Prince of Persia, or that spirit that is above them, because that spirit was seen right back at the ruler first mentioned under Kedorlaomer, right? Because what was he trying to do? He enslaved the people. He enslaved the people for 12 years, 13 years goes past, and rebellion and a new world order starts to come to the fore. How it comes to the fore? Well, Abraham gets involved. In other words, a friend of God gets involved. And what you're seeing right now with Israel attacking and all of the things that we can watch, and we can just go through news and if you want and just cover all of the news, but you can see that yourself. What I want to do is piece things together and actually look at the prophecy, because that's the cool part. When we start looking at the prophecy and go, hold on a minute, the Bible is 100% accurate when it comes to prophecy. And as it's 100% accurate, that should fill us full of faith, because we know what else is said. We know that we have the assurity that we follow Christ. And here's the thing. We know that Christ wins. We know the end of the story. We know what happens at Mckibben. We know even what happens before the tribulation comes, our blessed hope. We know all of this. And as that's the case, we can hold firmly to 100% fulfillment of prophecy, going, well, he just fulfilled Jeremiah 49. It is still in the fruition of being fulfilled. I believe it has to be fulfilled according to the American and Israeli standard in 2 weeks, to the point of no way of enrichment happening again. And then if it doesn't fulfill in that, and it takes a little bit longer, it takes 3-4 weeks, you're going to see a repercussion economically, and that repercussion economically is going to escalate us toward the CBDC system, which will be the platform for the beast system, which will be the platform for what we're seeing. So if we can see all of that happening, and we can look at it and we can go, hold on a minute, that is happening in my lifetime. Well, you know what else is guaranteed then to happen in my lifetime? Boom, the rapture. And that means my blessed hope is around the corner. And I go, oh, well, if my blessed hope is around the corner, I have to keep hydrating. That is still roasting, right? If my blessed hope is around the corner, and if I don't die here in my office right now from heat exhaustion, then how cool is that? And how much time is left? Is this a provocation to be like Noah and to get as many people onto the boat as possible, to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ, to be the outstretched arms to everybody that we see? That's the provocation to me. That's what's so cool about this. Not war. I hate war. I pray for the peace of Jerusalem. I pray for the peace of the Middle East. But I know prophecy is being fulfilled. And when God removes kings, when God removes principalities, he is doing so because of what has been done. And according to this, they have provoked God to anger. Well, yeah, you can see why. The continual firing of rockets, the continual equipping of proxies to attack Israel, to October 7th, for instance, wouldn't have happened without Iran. Iran was the financier behind October 7th. And by the way, Joe Biden was the financier behind Iran. So this is what kicked all of this off. And now we're seeing Israel step up. And now we're seeing President Trump and the American administration come in. And listen, people hate, people love President Trump. I don't care. He is just a bloke. But I am seeing right now he's doing the right thing. When he continues to do the right thing, I don't know. But right now he is. And if they come in and they put the weight there so that it forces the likes of the IRGC or Khamenei to come out of hiding and go, and then they get rid of the Bashir nuclear plant and all of the other nuclear plants, and we know they've been hitting some, and we know that they've hit them successfully. But if you get rid of all of that, that's the full fulfillment of Jeremiah 49. And what happens if Al Khamenei then goes to Russia? And now you've got Bashir and you've got Khamenei in Russia, and you've got maybe the office meeting, the war room meeting that plans Ezekiel 38. But also look at what would happen as well, just by and by, right? If when this happens, right, Iran's done, right? When this happens, or certainly the Iranian leadership is done, when this happens, there is going to be a void in the Middle East, right? Nature abhors a vacuum. And what you're going to see is those who have strength in the Middle East start to step up. I believe you're going to see the likes of Turkey specifically. I would say al-Sharia, or aka al-Jilani of Syria, but he is basically a proxy of Erdogan in Turkey. But Turkey will garner more strength. Turkey hates Israel. Turkey wants Israel gone. Erdogan wants to establish a brand new caliphate. All of that will come to play. But what you'll see is one strong player left there. And if Khamenei and Bashir are over with Putin in Russia, one strong player who definitely, if things come down to a financial system, things come down to a financial problem, which seems likely considering what the effects of this war is doing, only in the space of a few days. If that's the case, could that be the hook in the jaw? Could that be Turkey turning to uh, Erdogan turning to Putin and saying, "Look, we need you, right? We need you, um, and bring back Khamenei as well, and bring let's get Iran involved as well. Bring back those who are in hiding. Bring them back, and we'll all go after them." Now, I personally think my personal opinion is that we're out of here by then, but again, I'm not dogmatic about that. But I believe that we are. But all of this is set up. All of this is prophetic. We are living in such a prophetic age, season, and I think we have to be responsible about what God's given us to steward. What has God given us to steward in this season? Are we stewarding our family? Are we leading them to Christ? Are we equipping them with the word? Are we discipling those around us? Because we need to steward what we've got or who God has given us into our lives. So, guys, I've talked long enough. Tell me if hit one if any of that made sense. I know it was all over the place. Um, and if you've got questions, you can throw your questions over to, or well, actually, Caitlin will throw the questions over to Discord. My wife, my wife is making fun of me. She has now, yeah, it's cooling down. She's now switched it off. She says she's a very nice wife, but she's just been sending me laughing faces. So, um, okay. So I'm going to look at the questions. Let me know if you got something. We've got ones there. Anybody, did you get something from tonight? Um, Let me just check. There's been an attack on Israel, but only 3 missiles I see, but they've all been intercepted. Um, yeah, that's all I see at the minute. So let's go to Discord. Okay, and what a cool name, Biscuit. Right. Sorry, I'm not technically minded, so things are popping up. General W. Clark comments about seventh floor directive of the U.S. regime changing 7 Arab countries in 7 years, ending with Iran. Why is that last country delayed till now? Um, in fairness, the reason I look, the only way I would answer this is I believe that you have to understand that the beast of Iran. Now, I don't mean that the beast is in the biblical beast, but I would say I've always identified Iran as the likes of a leviathan, the likes of like an octopus type of creature because it has its tentacles and everything. So Iran has not really, certainly the IRGC since 1979, has not been in the interest of building up their country and national pride or building up their country as a nation or equipping the citizens. What they've been interested in doing is destabilizing regions. So they've destabilized the Middle East for so long, they've destabilized different areas in the world. And even if you take the financiers and for all of the protests that started happening post October 7th, certainly in the UK, it was financed by Iran. We know that if you go to London, there was a whole centre that was financed specifically by the IRGC for the purpose of spreading pro Palestinian propaganda and encouraging discord on the streets. So, Iran is that nature, right? Iran is the chaos maker. So, if you're talking about the 7 year thing, the 7 year plan, chaos is a key element, okay? So, even in terms of ancient history and every kind of every world system, right? So whether it's Mesopotamian, Canaanite, whether it's Sumerian, whether it's Roman, whether it's Greek, they all start with a chaos element or a chaos based. So we would say it as Leviathan. and then the chaos beast gets conquered, and a new world order begins. So chaos is always the last to fall, because you have to get the people to the point of complete fatigue. You have to get the people to the point of stress and ready to accept whatever counterfeit you bring on the scene. Because really, this comes from the phrase tohu bohu in Genesis 1 and in Isaiah as well. But in Isaiah, that verb tohu that we take, it says that the earth was without form and void. Tohu really means vain and chaotic, right? So the world, according to Isaiah 45, was chaotic. It says God did not make the world that way. But this is the element in which we certainly get the creation story from Genesis 1, 2, and 3, right? That it comes out of chaos, because God can bring order out of chaos all the time. He can bring order out of discord. He can bring order out of chaos, and that's what he does whenever the earth was without form and void, and God spoke. Boom, brings order. The enemy copies this, mimics this. So if you go to the Babylonian culture, it was the demon Tiamat, or the again, it was a Leviathan creature, a sea creature like tentacles and all of this. And Marduk slays Tiamat, or you get this in the Baal Hadad story. Again, slayed, right? All of these chaos entities slayed. And then you could go back, you want to go further, you look at the 2024 Olympics, and remember that certainly in terms of those with a Luciferian intent, they do they do pre-framing, right? So they show you what they're going to do, and then they do it. And you got Dionysus and Apollo on the same display. I've talked about this so much, right? But Dionysus in Grecian culture represents chaos, and Apollo, even though they're both sides of the same coin, Apollo represents order out of chaos. But the enemy brings not order out of chaos the way God brings order out of chaos. He brings control out of chaos. So if Iran is the last to fall in that sequence, then it is to bring a controlling new system. Now, I believe that God is behind the fall of Iran, because that's what's prophetic according to Jeremiah 49. It is God who's behind the fall of Iran, but I do believe nefarious forces will capitalize upon this, if that makes sense. Um, hey, Prophecy Recon. Let me see if I can get into my phone again and see what the next question. Right, hold on. Where did we go? Sherry's asked, these are good questions. If the Iranian government is removed, who takes over? The US? No, not really. Not in long term. So as far as we've seen in political intent, the US are not saying that they're going to take over in anywhere. They're there to protect their assets. But what you would have, if a government falls, you would have surrounding territories get involved to try and um, establish order. Now, the IRGC were put in place from the 1979 revolution. So there's already talks to bring back the Crown Prince. Okay, so if they bring back the Crown Prince, who I think would be likened, because if you think back to the Shah, who was put in, yes, he was put in through the CIA, but he was put in and he was progressive in terms of, if someone wanted to follow the tenets of Islam, they could follow that. If someone wanted to follow Christianity or Judaism, they could follow that. And women walked about in skirts and didn't have to wear the hijab or anything like that. So that would be a case. It would be a collective sort of responsibility. It could be UN based, but I have my feeling is it would be more the likes of the big players in the Middle East getting involved. And certainly Saudi Arabia would get involved. Certainly Israel would want to have a say. But I think the likelihood is, if that is the case, it could be the return of the Crown Prince. It could be the return of the Shah dynasty, if that makes sense. I think that's the most likely. Certainly in terms, if you take the prophecy of Jeremiah 49 and we take it in terms of a principality being dethroned and God setting his spiritual authority over the nation, I would suggest that someone like the Crown Prince would be put in there to facilitate that. Because he's individually great or anything like that, but because he is moderate and he would allow that to happen. Whereas, like I said, people lose their lives for their faith in Iran. If my wife is still watching, because I have overheated. It's now better temperature now, but could you bring me up a glass of water, please? Right. Um, Full of Hope has said, I was brought up Anglican, but a few years ago I was saved. I can find no one to baptize me since that time. Repent and be baptized. I'm now 58 and limited mobility. I can make it to Victory Church. Can you please baptize me? Yes, yes, we can. Um, we can definitely do that. We don't have a baptismal tank. Normally, we do our baptisms at the sea. So we wait for the warmer months. And if we can't do it at the sea, we make other arrangements. But if you let me know when you're going to come, and we can certainly talk about it and arrange a time and get you baptized. Um, Are we entering, Remy's asked, are we entering into that dispensations of the global reset in terms of digital ID and also the surveillance that is bound to happen? We're certainly, thank you, thank you. Oh, that's it. I'm not going to pass out now. um, yeah, we're certainly in a time in which, look, if you take the rhetoric of, and you actually just take a second to just dig around the UN's plans and around what's going on, the 2030 agenda is well underway. Despite uh, open objections to it, there has been no delay in the 2030 agenda. The only thing that I saw that people took as a delay was the removal of the advertisement that said that you will own nothing and be happy, and the stepping down and subsequent I guess, legal issues with Klaus Schwab. But it has not changed that, because the World Economic Forum is not the central power behind it. The UN together, they're all on board with this, right? So if you take the likes of legislation that's coming in, and we shared this last week about the UK. The UK are bringing in, and they're in reading right now, respect orders. Respect orders are absolutely crazy. But the UK are not alone in this. Germany has their defamation bill, but their defamation bill and the respect orders have one key element that unites them both. Excuse me, and the term is offence, right? So a respect order. So these are laws, legislations coming in that come in line with the 2030 agenda to eradicate Christianity, to eradicate opposing views, right? So, with a respect order, the proposal right now is that if you cause someone offence, you can face 2 years in prison. Then they go on to list what are the elements that cause someone offence: too loud, too opinionated, sharing in a public square, something that upsets someone. These are all things that we do, certainly with sharing the gospel. So, all of this, hey Bubba, all of this, a respect order just shows you that we're en route to that system. We're en route to that system. Um, the new fraud prevention bill in the UK gives legal right. Now, yes, I think it's in its second reading right now. Legal right to the UK government to go into anybody's bank account and remove money if they believe that there's been some sort of fraud there, right? So now here's the thing: what they're classing in that is that, let's say, someone gave you a present, a bit of cash as a present, you banked it, right? And they said, well, you didn't include that in your tax form, so we're just going to remove that. And then the premise of this is that you're guilty until proven innocent. So all of these things are coming into play. Even if you go further, that they're over here, they're looking to increase abortion up to birth. Their assisted suicide bill in the UK is has had a few amendments, but the amendments don't seem to be great, and it's continuing forward. We're all going in that direction. Digital IDs are here right now. If you're not sure about whether you've got a digital ID, the digital ID seems to be taking off your digital footprint. So there's all of this collective data, and basically what's happening right now, if you go into an airport, you'll be scanned, your face is there, and all the data is collected. Boom, you've got a digital ID, right? Now, whether or not you're in use of the digital ID right now, well, that's up to you. But when there's a global catastrophe that takes away cash, perhaps the closing of the Strait of Hormuz, and if that happens, and cash is no longer available because they've moved everybody over to the central bank digital currency, because all that cash, that paper that you have, is now useless and worthless. Well, then that digital ID will be in place. And the same thing is that, yeah, why have I got so dark? Hold on, let me turn my light up. All right, okay, still dark, right? Um, if you look at the Raya Declaration of 16th of December 2024, even though we've got digital IDs already, May 7th, we had the rollout of the Real ID in America. Last Christmas to this Christmas, they've been initiating the digital ID here in the UK. By that Raya Declaration, Saudi Arabia said, and the UN sponsored that 2030, there will be a global digital ID. A global digital ID. Now that to me just says that all this stuff has to be together, Remy, and all this stuff has to be in place for we're heading in that direction regardless, unfortunately. But the thing is we're not to be afraid of it. We realize that again it's prophetic, and as it's prophetic, it means our window is here, and as it's our window is here, we need to get busy about our kingdom business, our Father's business, and also at the same time, Isaiah 60, one of my favorite scriptures, right? Isaiah 60 talks about what I believe is an end time season. It says, darkness covers the land, right? I don't know if you feel like that's already happened. Deep darkness to the people. But you arise and shine, for your light has come. And then you go, well, what am I going to do about all of this? And the financial system and all of this. Well, it goes on to verse 5 saying, the wealth of the Gentiles will be brought to the righteous. Why? Because you need to continue about the kingdom business. In other words, trust that God has you in this. I also think that, look, it might be worthwhile making sure that your car is filled with petrol, making sure that if you've got an oil tank for your heating, making sure that's filled. Even though it's summer, buy it now before prices go up. That's my opinion anyway. So Dan has said, I have just heard that the GB government has voted to decriminalise abortion. Have you heard anything? Yeah, I just basically so they've looked to the abortion's an operation in the UK anyway, but what they've looked to do is take it up to birth. Now I don't know if that's I know that there was a petition going around up until about 2 days ago, so I don't know if that's changed as yet. But as far as I know, we're going in that direction anyway. I was speaking to someone about this last week because the ones who have really stood in opposition to this tended not to be the church, but tended to be mothers and organizations who have had where the people have had children with disabilities, because the pressure put on parents to delete based on a disability is massive. And obviously, if you've ever had a, or worked with a child or seen a child or taught a child who has a disability, they are still blessings from God. And some of them are the most loving, funny, articulate, and best to be around people that you'll meet. But according to the world standards, they want to remove them. So it's actually been, parents who are involved in those organizations who have stood against this bill. Um, okay, Anna said, Gary, there's reports that Khamenei has surrendered power to the military in Iran. Do you think this is a good thing? I think it's kind of, I think it's a non-event really, because I think that Khamenei going, here you have power, is basically him saying, I don't want to be culpable for the fall of a nation. Um, the Iranian leadership, in terms of military, the head of the military command was taken out. Then they put in a new leader, and he was in there for 2 days, and Israel took him out. So it's kind of it. It doesn't matter who's in power. It doesn't matter who's, they're all being taken out. So if they're standing, in terms of the Iranian military, still serve the IRGC, um, but it's whether or not they're. I don't think the loyalty to the IRGC is there now. Um, the IRGC ruled kind of with the fear element, and they even held that fear element over the world. Certainly with the Strait of Hormuz, the idea of closing that kept the world at bay. They closed it. They tried to close it in 2019, or done a partial closure based on Trump's ordered assassination attempts, but they were forced to open. But or Trump, not Trump being assassinated, Trump's assassination attempts of IRGC leaders and his removal from the nuclear deal. Um, so I don't think it holds much weight, to be honest, either way. I think what's happening is Iran's falling. Um, did you know we have a NATO summit? Uh, and do you know the topic is depopulation? Um, it does not surprise me. It does not surprise me. Depopulate, or I have to be. I'm going to be censored for a lot of this. But Depop is a big subject, and certainly it fits in with Revelation 17, because you look at the harlot, right? The harlot in Revelation 17 is, I believe, Gaia worship. It is earth worship. But the kings, the 10 kings system, which I believe those 10 kings are probably walking around right now. They're not probably kings, they're probably technocrats or something like that. But that system doesn't really believe in the Gaia worship, just uses it for their benefit. And I think that's what the purpose of the Depop ideology is, that man is um, the problem and the virus for the world. And it shows you that, if that's the case, why don't any of these people ever start with themselves? It's also, I've forgotten the name. Anyway, I'll not go down that route. But it's not surprising. It's just, I guess, it's something that I personally believe has been at play for years. I believe that there's an awful lot of elite that see this. It's certainly a theosophical belief. It's certainly a belief in certain societies, certain secret societies, which, by the way, certain members of government, including our prime minister, belong to, and they all believe in that Depop idea. Idea. Um, do you see Ezekiel 38? Assets asked, do you see Ezekiel 38 happening before the tribulation starts, or after the tribulation starts? I generally see it as before, right? I see it as a precursor to the tribulation. And the reason I do, well, there's a couple of reasons, but I'll center on one for time. The main reason I do is um, I take the Islamic fundamentalist side in this, and that's probably worded wrong, in terms of the problem of Islamic fundamentalism needs to be eradicated for the arrival of one who will be an answer to all, talking about the AC, right? So for that to happen, two things have to happen. One, the rapture of the church, because the church are not going to stand for the arrival of the lawless one. In fact, the church are the restrainer of the lawless one. So they need to be removed. We need to be removed. But also, if you've got a fundamentalist Islamic approach, you will not have an individual come on the scene who will be able to unite and be worshipped and adored by Jewish people, by secular people, and by Islamists. So they need to remove something. Well, we know that Judaism as major focus of the tribulation, because Jeremiah 30 verse 7 tells us it's Jacob's trouble. So I believe the Esau element, to a certain extent, in terms of fundamentalists, in terms of Islam, are removed in the Ezekiel 38 conflict, and that paves the way for what comes throughout the tribulation. I believe that when we look at this, Ezekiel 38 is, I believe, pre-tribulation, but post-rapture. Now, it may be that it's not post-rapture. My reasoning for believing that it's post-rapture is because of the focus that is put upon the nation of Israel and not upon the rest of the world. However, you could say that about Psalm 83 to some extent. You could say that about Zechariah 12. You could definitely say that in terms of the focus being on Iran or in Elam in terms of Jeremiah 49. But I just kind of lean that way, that I think that we're gone by the time of that. Um, but again, it's an arguable point. But yeah, I would say it is pre-tribulation. I believe the tribulation. Well, that's going to be the seals opening from Revelation 5 and then into 6. Jesus opens the seals, and then Revelation 8 was the first seal. The first seal that we see is the white rider. And the white rider coming on the scene, I personally see him because I take the Canaanite literature around this, but I also take the biblical framework of this, that I see him as the Antichrist or the pseudo Christ. And I had somebody recently try and write to me and saying, no, it's not. It's Christ himself. No, look, if you go into the original language, you can see why it's not Christ. He's coming to control, to conquer and to control. Well, Christ isn't coming to do that, and he certainly isn't coming to do that until Revelation 19. So it doesn't work that way. It won't be there in Revelation 6 and Revelation 19 and then just somehow disappear in between. So I see it as the pseudo Christ coming on the scene then. So I see that as the start. But I see Ezekiel 38 as beforehand. However, the connecting point for all is what we talked about. These are all brilliant questions, is what we talked about last week, is Gog. Now, I said this last week. If you take the Septuagint and you look at Amos 7 verse 1, it identifies who Gog is. So we'll say that, and a lot of people say Putin could be Gog or Erdogan could be Gog. Listen, it's not about the individual. Gog is a spirit. He is identified in Amos 7, verse 1, in the Bible that the apostles would have been reading, right? As in the scriptures, the Old Testament scriptures that the apostles would have been reading in the Koine Greek, right? When they looked at that, they saw that Gog, G-O-G, was called the king of the locust, the caterpillar, right? Well, the king of the locust is also Abaddon or Apollyon in Revelation chapter 9. And so the connecting point of what you're saying in terms of whether Ezekiel 38 could be in the middle of the tribulation or before the tribulation is that it is certainly a spirit that is continually making an appearance. So in one sense, it seems to be an individual from the north led to attack Israel, Ezekiel 38 and 39. In another sense, it seems to be an individual who comes on the scene making a treaty off the back of that. And I believe off the back of the repercussions of the fallout of Ezekiel 38 and how the world is in a disarray. Um, and then at the end of Revelation, when there is another Gog, Magog war that has the whole of the earth involved, it's all of the nations. Well, that's the same spirit continually making an incursion. Um, yeah, there we go. It is such a cool study. I'll put it up because Bob was just throwing it up there. Um, King Gog is identified as the king of the locusts, the king caterpillar. And again, it identifies with Abaddon, Apollyon, um, and it's a way to sort of look into that. Let me just remove that. I think, was that the last one? Hold on. Phone keeps locking. Oh no, I've got one more. Did I answer question 7? Oh, sorry, no, I didn't. Uh, I'll answer quickly. It's from Annette. Annette Hamilton has asked, "What are the 7 spirits of God?" Isaiah 11. Isaiah 11 talks about the 7 spirits. The 7 spirits are also mentioned in Revelation 4 as being in the throne room. Oh, that's help if I count. But they're identified in Isaiah 11. And what they really are for me, and when I read this, this is what I say. They're the characterizations of the character the character elements of the Ruach HaKodesh, of the Holy Spirit, right? So it says, right, Isaiah 11, there shall come forth a rod from the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. The Spirit of the Lord, 1, shall rest on him. The Spirit of wisdom, the Spirit of understanding, the Spirit of counsel, the Spirit of might, the Spirit of knowledge, and the fear of the Lord. And these, thank you, Deborah, these are the 7 spirits, right? So these are the personifications of the Ruach Elohim, or the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit. They are personified fully in Yeshua, in Jesus. So he walked exuding every element of that. And in Revelation 4, uh, yeah, it says, verse 5, and from the throne proceeded lightnings, thunderings, and voices. 7 lamps of fire were burning before the throne. The lamps, the menorah, are the church, which are the 7 spirits of God. Anonymously, the 7 spirits of God and the 7 lampstands. That means that we are supposed to personify the characteristics of the Holy Spirit as well. Thank you, C Blessed. I appreciate that. Thank you guys for your support. It's really, really appreciated. So the 7 spirits are fully personified in the branch of Jesse, which is Jesus Christ. And the 7 spirits are meant to embody, and they will embody, like they will be fully, it shows you the state of how we'll walk in heaven. The the lamps, the churches are burning in the throne room of God, and they are personified by the 7 spirits of God. In other words, we're walking in that element. Thank you so much, Deborah. I really appreciate that. Um, there was one more question, I think, wasn't it? Thank you for guys. I really appreciate it. Anytime you super stick or anything like that, we really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Do you think the wars cause countries into or push countries into bankruptcy, which can cause famine because of the millions spent on weapons already? There are shelves being emptied in countries. So the question, let's see, was it C Blessed put up? Yeah, about NATO and Depop. It all goes together, right? So if you have economic crisis, right? So let's say now, I'm not saying for so saith the Lord, but I am saying that it is I do believe we're at this turning point into the New World Order. And I do believe that this element of what we have seen, your equipment is overheating, I think. Am I not showing? Hold on. I seem okay on mine. Let me see. Yeah, I'm okay on mine. Can you? Hopefully, you can all hear me. I forgot what the question was. Oh yeah, I do. I know it, right. So it's kind of like a chain of events. If the closing of the Strait of Hormuz um, causes 25% of the world's oil not to go through, then you'll see that economic crash. That economic crash will go everywhere, and it has a trickle effect. So if the oil is sky high, then people will stop buying services. They will stop eating out. They will stop doing this, and that causes stagnation of the economy. When the stagnation of the economy happens, thank you so much, Susan. Really appreciate that. When the stagnation of the economy happens, then what you'll see on top of that is if this continues and continues on for longer, it will go past stagnation to global depression. If it goes to global depression and all of that, food prices, which are already ridiculously high, will likely go up by another third, right? So another 30%. And if they go up by another 30%, that will mean that people will not be able to eat to the same degree. So you could find that those on the lower echelon would enter into a famine of sorts, right? Now, if that is the case, it may not be a famine as in like biblical times, because I think that comes through the tribulation, certainly under the black horse. But what it would do is it would put people in the position to be manipulated for what comes next. That's what is looked for, right? Also, what it does, according to the NATO agenda, according to the UN agenda, according to global elite agenda, it causes depop, right? And if it causes depop, then it's sort of playing into their hands of what they want. And it's all biblical. But really, the biggest depop that will happen will be throughout the tribulation. So I think we're sitting at the precipice. And I personally think everybody in the world senses it, but just maybe not everybody knows what they're talking about in terms of this, or not everybody knows what the Bible says. Maybe I think politicians sense it. I think Luciferians sense it. I think elitists sense it. Thank you so much, Weejo. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Um, I think all of them, they sense it. They sense there's something coming. They sense a major catastrophe. That's why we were all told here in Europe and in the UK to make sure that we have 3 days worth of food, water, 3 days worth of light, like candles and all of that stuff, and 3 days worth of oil in our car and all of this. They they want this, because what it does is it gets you into a state of complete and utter disarray, so that you go, oh, what, there's somebody coming on with a central bank digital currency, and all I have to do is take a mark for it. Oh, well, sure, what harm's that doing? You don't understand the troubles I'm going through, because I'm ready to be uh, I'm starving here. I could, and we're really struggling. So I'll just take a mark. And listen, when you take the mark, it'll not be just out of stress. It will be a degree of worship. So I'm using hyperbole here. When you take the mark, it'll be a degree of worship. And CBDCs will not be the mark of the beast, because the beast has to be the form of worship behind the CBDC. The CBDC system, the digital ID and integration into a digital wallet and a digital identity, and being characterized in that way, that will be the platform and the technology used for it, and that's what we're seeing right now. Um, well, you've seen like these prices are already hiking, so there's already one of the things to note is gold prices. So if the economy, if those who are like the economists in the world are thinking that there's going to be a move towards a depression, a global depression, then you'll start to see gold prices hit a spike, right? So I think they're around about $3,500, something like that, $3,400 an ounce or something like that. They're already spiking, and I think that that's the markets trying to buffer themselves to a certain degree for what's coming. Now, if you go back, and I would say to everybody, watch Britt Gillette, he's brilliant on this. But if you go back and you look at the Japan only a few weeks ago, and they were reporting something like 8.5 trillion losses in the insurance market in a couple of days. They were reporting all of this. In other words, I think Japan's debt is something like 237% GDP, so 237% over their global domestic product is their debt, and it's growing and growing and growing. Now, if all of this happens, you'll see certain markets hit first. I personally think Germany is set up for hitting. America, you have a cushion. Okay, you have a cushion when it comes to oil, and you have a cushion with all that because one of the things that Trump said was drill, drill, drill. However, in the UK, we're in trouble because what we had with with our previous couple of governments is they decided to get rid of power plants. They decided to not just shut down coal production, but to blow up and destroy the factories. So we're sitting here completely and utterly dependent. America isn't, so you have that freedom and you have that sort of ability there to move past that. A cushion to a degree, but I think the major concern is Europe. Now, this then goes into what's happening, right? So, if Europe is in this major downfall because there's economic pressure coming off oil, because there's a war in the Middle East, what happens? Will Europe garner around pressuring Israel to stop, pressuring Israel into a two-state solution, and then trying to maybe get their hands in certain areas around the world? Well, I think so. Europe is already garnering themselves up to this point where they are trying to be separate from Washington. I think it was last month, Ursula von der Leyen turned around and called their move towards the EDU, the European Defence Union Pact, as their divorce from Washington. And what they talked about was having an 800 billion um, war chest. So they want a standing army in Europe. What that all relates to is a reconstituted, rebuilt Roman Empire. Everything's happening, guys. Everything's happening. This is like, it's one of the most, well, it's the most amazing time to be alive. But here's the thing, it's not to cause us to worry, stress, or fear. Honestly, Matthew 10, verse 16 comes to mind, right? Matthew 10 talks about in fact, Matthew 10 is the little commission, right? Matthew 10, verse 7 says, Go ye, heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons, right? It is part of the commission walk of a Christian. Fulfilled in the Great Commission, go ye therefore make disciples of all nations, baptizing in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, in Matthew 28:19. So we see that, and this in this same chapter, what Jesus does is he sends out the disciples, and it's the same story of Luke 10. In Luke 10, he sends out the 70 as a way to show up the principalities and powers, because 70 represents the totality of nations. And remember, the B'nai Elohim had the governing power over the nations. So he sends out the 70, and he sends them out to cast out demons, heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse lepers. In other words, go against the atmosphere and the spirit of the age. And then he says, take nothing with you. Don't take an extra sleeping bag. Don't take an extra pair of Nikes. Leave your phone at home. You don't need another coffee cup. You don't need, anything else with you, because everything will be provided. And then you think to yourself, well, how is everything being provided? Well, that's the beauty of walking with God. You know that when you walk with God and you're about God's business, He always makes a way. But also, Matthew 10:16 comes to play. Be as wise as serpents, as harmless as doves. Now, to be as wise as serpents means that you need to listen to the following of the wisdom of God. Ephesians 3 verse 9 says that we are to make, that God makes his wisdom manifold wisdom, right? That's wisdom in all areas. That includes the area of how to get food, how to pay your bills, how to keep your, he provides that wisdom, and we need to listen to it. Whether that's a business idea, whether that's a way in which you can prepare now for things. And I don't mean out of fear. I think, listen, I'm not against anybody preparing, but do so out of the right spirit. Never do it out of fear. Do it because God is telling you, look, I want you to do this, right? And the provocation of that, God can give you the wisdom to go through a season, not as someone who's struggling, but someone who's thriving and becomes a light to those in darkness. Because Isaiah 60 comes to play. Darkness covers the land, deep darkness the people, but you arise and shine. Well, how do you arise and shine if you're struggling like everybody else? Well, look, you won't be if you're as wise as serpents, as harmless as doves. Does that make sense? I'm hoping it does, because um, honestly, like I've had occasions where we have been really, really destitute, and it is God who has provided the wisdom to get through it. And He's provided maybe an idea, maybe a little. And listen, I'm not smart enough, so it's been God every single time. And that's what He does. He's absolutely amazing that way. So don't fear the season that is being, uh, I guess, trailered or advertised upon us. Don't fear it. Instead, put your faith in Christ and understand that He is going to use you in this season. And hopefully, hopefully this season isn't very long, right? I believe in the Amos, is it Amos 8 model of Amos, the prophet Amos was told that, to get a basket of summer fruits, because judgment was coming, and summer's a small season. So get enough fruit spoils if it's in the basket too long. You've got a small window to reach out for the kingdom. Amen. So guys, gonna love you and leave you. Thank you so much, everybody. I was overwhelmed. I had like hundreds, whether it was on YouTube or Facebook or private messages, hundreds of messages wishing me a happy birthday, and I really appreciated that. What I didn't appreciate was my wife making the waiter at the restaurant, making them all sing happy birthday to me, and she tried it twice, and the second time I actually says nope and just got up and walked out. But I don't like all of that. So, but I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your birthday wishes. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you so much for being part of this community, guys. Isn't it absolutely amazing that we're part of a community together where we get to chase after the word, the leading of the Holy Spirit, to delve into the scriptures, to glorify God, and to go about our Father's business. But we get to come together on these days and actually gather together and praise God, and learn about His Word. And actually, the questions, every one of your questions gets me to think, right? And makes me have to think about, what actually I believe on this. So it's, I'm just blessed and honored to be part of this community. Um, and look, I just, yeah, thank you so much. I'm very tired. We were away last night. We're just back now. So I'm going to go, and I'm going to get some rest. So, guys, God bless. And I will see you all tomorrow for Bible study. And who knows what's happening by tomorrow prophetically, so we'll just keep an eye on things. But I will see you tomorrow for Bible study, and I call you the head and not the tail, above and not beneath, kings, queens, and priests, in Jesus' mighty name. And remember, you can do all things through Christ who strengthens.